You are officially invited. Yes, you. You're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on October 9th. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 224. Welcome to the 224th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. In today's episode, I share an on-air client session with Rachel. Now, Rachel was part of my most recent 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. And what's really neat about Rachel is that she came to the program with a ton of charting experience. So she had actually been charting her cycles for about 5 years. I think she mentions that not necessarily like seriously the whole time, but she definitely had quite a bit of charting experience. And so she joined the group to be able to gain that full clarity and to really have an opportunity to ask all of the questions that she had just about her charts. And you get to hear a lot of those today. And so I think this is just a really great episode to give you some great insights about charting and also an opportunity to listen into my philosophy on charting, which of course I love to share at any opportunity. But, I think that a lot of us get caught up with a lot of the niggly details, especially once you start to get the hang of it. So we can really look at our charts under a microscope, so to speak, and look at every little thing and think that it means kind of the end of the world. But really what we're looking for are patterns over time. And so that's something we get into in today's episode. Now, if you are waiting for the last minute to jump into Fertility Awareness Mastery, so our October 2018 round, then the last minute has arrived. If you're listening to this episode in real time, in just a few days, we're actually going to be starting. So registration is closing very shortly. You do have like a couple of days if you're listening when this episode first airs. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program if you have questions, or you can email me directly to see if there's any spaces left, if you're kind of going in under the wire. But yes, so this is the kind of like your last call. We would love to have you in the group. At the time that I'm recording this, we still have 2 spaces available. But I do record the episodes a little bit ahead of time. So if you aren't sure, if the page is up, then there's still space in the group. So make sure to apply before we get started, because we would love to have you in this round. Now let's jump into today's episode with Rachel. And in today's episode, I'm really excited to be here with Rachel. Rachel was a member of my most recent 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. And the program has now ended. So we had a full 3 months together. And I suppose my favorite thing about working with Rachel was all of her awesome questions. She was always keeping me on her toe or on my toes. So I really appreciated that. We talked about it a lot and we joked about it. So thank you for being here, Rachel.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, and so I'd love to give you an opportunity just to share your own experience with fertility awareness, if you've ever used hormonal birth control and how long you've been using it, and just kind of what led you at this point and this stage to actually, jump in and join the class.
Yeah, so I started using the pill, and I don't even know which one it was. I was just like, I don't know. Sure, I'll take that. I think when I was 19, and I was on it for 5 years, and I went off of it. I don't know exactly why. I was getting into a lot of natural health stuff at the time more intensely, and I think maybe just intuitively, I was like, I don't think I want to take this anymore. So I kind of just stopped taking it and figured out all of this fertility awareness stuff on my own for a while. And so that was 5 years ago. So I've been off the pill for 5 years, and I've been tracking using Kindara for those 5 years. But it was a slow progression of actually like really tracking, not just like tracking when my period started and when it ended. And then, like slowly trying to work in the basal body temperatures using just like a regular basal temp thermometer. And I did that really sporadically. I wasn't very consistent for a long time. And then I started learning. I got Tony Wessler's book, The Taking Charge of Your Fertility, and read that and got more into it. I guess I should say also, when I went off the pill, it started off fine. I got my period the first month, and then my cycles just kept getting longer and longer and longer until it was like every 90 days I'd get a period. And I was having really bad hormonal acne. My skin was breaking out. I was so upset because I live in LA, and at the time I was still pursuing a career in acting, and now I'm pursuing a career in women's health because I decided this stuff's really fascinating and important. But that was devastating. My hair texture changed and was falling out. I have really curly hair, and it became really just like brittle and straight. So I felt like my world was just falling apart. And that's when I really started looking into like different alternative methods. I started seeing acupuncturists, naturopaths, just everything I could figure out to do. And and then eventually now it's been, I think about 2.5 years ago, I started like a training in women's health and went down that route. But so I wanted to start your program. I found out about you, I think maybe through Rachel Eyre, actually. She was in the same training that I did and would pop in sometimes during our sessions. And I started listening to the podcast a bit, and then I just realized that the Justice method seemed way more thorough, and I like that because I love like details. But also I was like, I can't seem to teach myself this from a book. Like, I want someone to like help me get through this. It seems more complicated. So that's why I started the program. And I had reservations at first. I was like, well, is this going to be weird that I'm doing this? Like, I've been charting for 5 years. I know about women's health. Like, I don't know if she's going to want me in this program. Like, she's going to be like, why are you here? But I knew I would learn so much, and I did. It was very enlightening. It was so great to learn it in a group with other people instead of by myself. So yeah, it's been a great experience. I've learned so much. I'm still learning from it. It's the information that you can gather, the just data on yourself and your health, even above and beyond other fertility awareness methods that you get from the Justice, is just really, really great. Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate you taking us through that. And I know when I first started offering this program, I know one of your exact thought of how can I help somebody if they've been charting for so long. I remember that thought crossed my mind. But as I followed a sort of similar path because I taught myself initially. And I remember that when I first started learning from trained teachers, I learned so much more. And what I've come to know now after offering this program is that there's lots to know, and different methods are quite different, as you mentioned. And so I'm glad that you were able to gain so much out of it, even though you had a ton of charting experience. And I tried to kind of highlight that. I think it's nice when there's women in the group that have lots of charting experience, because there's a lot of things that you can contribute there's a lot of things you learn just from charting.
So much. Well, and as you know, like, some of the more broad topics weren't things that I would ask about, but I just had about 1 million nitpicky, very specific questions. And I'm just like, who else can I ask this to except for Lisa? So.
Yes. So in your case, then, you've been off of hormonal birth control for quite some time. So it's been about, is it 5 years?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, over 5 years now.
Mm-hmm. And you have a lot of charting experience. And I think it's interesting in your journey as well that your cycles kind of changed and you had to kind of figure out, so that's a big part of your journey. So maybe tell us where you're at now with your cycles. And of course, I want to get a sense of what you want to make sure that we talk about in our call today.
Yeah, so now my cycles are pretty regular, or actually very regular. They're always between pretty much 28 and 30, maybe 31 days. And I have good temperature changes after ovulation. It's always a very clear increase. And then now the two things that I implemented, one being the Justice way of taking your temperature, which is to leave your thermometer in and let it warm up and then take your temperature again, which I had never heard of. I didn't know that was an option. That's kind of like regulated made my charts look a little prettier. And then also I started taking like a liquid iodine, like a nascent iodine supplement a few months ago. And I really think that combined with just some overall reduction in stress in my life, like really improved my temperatures. And I think before I might have looked at my chart and thought like, oh, like kind of thyroid-y issue, but I've had all my, like a full thyroid panel before and never just like not had an issue. So I think it was really more a stress issue and a low progesterone issue then. And I don't seem to be having that now. But I had a really weird cycle this month, so that's perfect because now I can talk about it. I'm like, oh, thank you. Great timing. Because normally they're just like kind of boring now. Like my period's great. I always like to joke with friends, but I really mean it that literally the first day of my period is my favorite day of the month. I love it. Like I feel great. I feel so happy. Like it's just like ecstatic to me. I just like, I look forward to it. And then I'm like, oh, it's over. Like the magic is over after that day. So yeah, and it wasn't always like that. I did used to have some cramping, but I don't anymore.
Some of the listeners may have gathered, but we should probably point out, so you're actively avoiding pregnancy and using fertility awareness as your birth control. And so speaking of that, kind of shifting the way that our culture looks at periods to being excited about it. But it's very interesting when you do kind of fall into that habit of using fertility awareness for birth control, because then when when your period's coming and when it does come, it's like another successful month of using fertility awareness.
Yeah, well,
you're not pregnant.
It's successful, but I also just enjoy like the different brain chemistry that I have going on that day. And it's just so nice because I just don't stress out anymore. And that's why I just love that I'm using fertility awareness method, because like this month, today's day 30 in my cycle, which normally I would be like, okay, I'm either getting my period today or I might have a little bit of spotting today, then actually start tomorrow. Like I would be like, okay, come on, like I should be feeling it. And I'm not feeling like I'm about to get my period because I'm not supposed to because I ovulated late. So now I know like, and I just love that. I think you've said this before. It's like your period's never late. Like your ovulation is late. So, knowing that, you just don't stress out about it because you know that you haven't ovulated yet. So if you haven't ovulated yet, you're not pregnant yet. So you're not freaking out about being pregnant then. And then like when you ovulated, when you should expect your period, and within like, a day or two range. So it's just great. I'm like, oh, thank God I do this so that I'm not like sitting here freaking out.
I love that. What you described is essentially body literacy. So, that term is used in different ways by different people. But when I say that term, I just mean that understanding how your cycle works, knowing how to identify ovulation, and understanding that basic sense of your cycle will fluctuate and change. There's no woman on earth that ever has the exact same cycle ovulating on the exact same day of her cycle every single month for her whole life. It's statistically impossible. And so I love just the place that you've gotten to now where you know exactly where you are in your cycle and you're comfortable with the fact that there will be some fluctuation and you know how to roll with it. I love it.
Yeah, but I do want to get around to talking to at some point a couple of the reasons why I think my ovulation may not have been may have been pushed back a little, because there were two kind of weird things this month. And of course, being like the ovulation detective, I want to know your thoughts on it.
Well, so I just pulled up your chart. Oh, this is an old one, I think. Mm-hmm. I have them all up here, but let me share the right one with you. So the audience, the listeners can't see your chart, but we will talk about it. So tell me about this cycle, your Wonky cycle.
So around days, I want to say probably 16, 17, and 18, somewhere. There were like 3 days where I took ibuprofen, which I hardly ever take ibuprofen. If I do, it's one day of the month. I just am like, I don't do it unless I absolutely have to. I'm like, no, like I don't want it. So I like randomly had 2 migraines because I was having some jaw issues, which I also want to talk to you about this because I was just talking to my doctor about some connections with miscarriage and jaw misalignment. So I had 2 migraines. So I took like 2 ibuprofen for 2 days in a row. And then the next day I went to the beach. Let's see, I can see when that is actually. Let's see. Or maybe it was the day after the migraines. So on the Sunday, the 15th, so maybe it was on the 16th, 17th, I had the migraines. And on the 15th, I went to the beach and I got a terrible sunburn. And I came back and like actually felt like very sick, like nauseated, not well, like super tired, and ended up taking 1 or 2 ibuprofen in the afternoon to kind of deal with the pain from my sunburn. And I know that I've read that ibuprofen can prevent the follicle from rupturing, but I don't know if it can at those doses for just like 3 days, because those, for most people, those are actually relatively low doses. But I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Well, I haven't looked into the research specifically around ibuprofen and the impact on ovulation. So, I mean, I would be very curious to see if there has been research to see if it does disrupt ovulation specifically. I know that, so ibuprofen, it's associated with a lot of different, like over the long-term use. So more, not necessarily like use it one time, but over the long term, it's associated with lots of different issues with gut health and increases your risk of developing certain conditions. So, I mean, if I were to just kind of dissect this based on what I've seen with regards to menstrual cycle changes and disruptions and ovulation delays and things like that, I don't know that I would point the finger solely at the ibuprofen, but possibly the stressful events that necessitated the use of the ibuprofen. Because, for instance, you know, it sounds like you got a little bit of sunstroke, maybe in addition to the sunburn, if you were feeling kind of nauseated. So, I mean, that's, your body's kind of ill, sick. That's right around the time of ovulation. So, I mean, this is not a perfect science, but what I can tell you from working with, you know, hundreds of women in these, and, you know, there's always something. Typically, if ovulation is delayed, there's always something that we can point to that, well, I should say at least there's most often something that we can point to that seems to be stress related around that time. And so just to give the listeners an idea, so I'm looking at, you can't see them, Rachel, but I'm looking at the previous 2 charts of yours that I have. And so it would appear as though ovulation happened around day 17 in your June chart, or sorry, day 16. The shift happened on day 17. And then it would appear that ovulation in your July chart also happened around then. So around day 16, 15, it's hard to say exactly because we have some outlier temperatures on those days. And then in this cycle, your ovulation seemed to happen around day 19. So in the moment when you're charting, it feels like it's forever. But a delay of 1 to 2 days, knowing that you did experience some kind of minor illnesses and the migraines and things like that around that time, it does make sense to me from that respect.
Okay, yeah, because I thought that too. I'm like, well, I know just being sick can prevent you from ovulating. So I kind of just thought also like having that sunburn or sun sickness was also just like, oh, I was sick. So my body was like, let's wait.
Yeah. Well, and then it would seem as though as soon as that all kind of subsided, then ovulation kind of quickly jumped in.
Yeah. And then I do have those 3 low temperatures that day. So I also just like, wonder if I just didn't have a great ovulation this month because it's just a little wonky for me. Like I haven't had dips that low in a while.
So for the listeners, when we're looking at Rachel's chart, her temperature spike happened on day 20 of her cycle. And then instead of the temperatures kind of going up and staying up, they kind of dip back down a little bit, but they're still all over the cover lines. So the all of the temperatures that we're talking about are still higher than her previous normal temperatures, but it kind of goes up and then down and then goes up again. So one thing that I'm going to point out is your temperature increase on day 20. The temperature is quite high. So let me see if I can see how many degrees. Like it goes up nearly like a half a degree or something like that. So, I mean, it's possible that the temperature on the 20th is kind of like more like maybe that's a bit of an outlier, even though it is legitimate, potentially like legitimately identifying ovulation, it is quite high. And so that could make the chart look a little bit more lopsided, if that makes sense. And I mean, it could also, so just to get a sense, I mean, with the chart that I'm looking at, I don't know when you were taking your temperatures, but during this period of time here this week, was it about the same time every day or let's see, this was the weekend. So this temperature here is on Friday. These two are on the
it was
weekend.
A little late. It was about an hour later or more than I usually do. Although that tends to not greatly increase my temperatures, like it being late, but it was late. It was like at 8:25, which is very late for me. And then the three low temperatures, I don't think we're at times. No, that like my third temperature, like that first really low one, it was also at 8:25 a.m. Mm-hmm. So they were actually both at the exact same time.
And were you sleeping about the same amount of time? I think we talked about sleep. You're pretty consistent with your sleep.
Yeah, I'm a sleeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like the number 5, that one is like 6:52. So it's funny because they're at like different times, but they're all the same.
And then you were checking your cervix.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really tell, but you do notice, so there's a difference between like how you've noted your cervix on your second day, so the day of the second high temperature, and then the fourth day after the shift. So do you remember how it was different?
I remember it just feeling like more open, but I feel like I had a hard time really tracking my cervix this month. Like it always seemed to be like even when it was a little bit higher, like it wasn't that much higher. Like it just didn't seem to be moving a lot this cycle, which was strange. Like usually I can tell when it's like a good amount higher or lower. And I was just having a very hard time with it. And then, it did seem like a bit more open, but I am working still on my cervical health, and I'm doing the topical A and the folate. And I don't know, like I'm having some intuitive feelings that like something's going on. Like there's some healing things, or it's just like adjusting, because it just seems a little wonky. And like I did have a day, it's in my notes, which you can't see on there, but I had like a 2W day, which I usually have some 2s, but I don't usually have the 2W. And it was not lubricative, so that makes me think like, cervical issues. And
for the listeners who have no idea what that means, it just means that you were observing dampness or wetness when you were doing your cervical mucus checking. Just to put out there.
What's a 2?
Yeah. So tell me okay, I have 2 questions. So refresh my memory. Were you checking your cervix semi-regularly before the class? I don't remember.
Yeah, I was. I've never charted it super consistently. I more kind of just do it in my head, just knowing like, okay, yeah, like I am getting close to ovulation because it's higher and it's softer, but I've never been too scientific about it.
Well, that's all right. So then the second question I have is what does your cervix typically do after ovulation? So in all those times that you're checking it, how is it different after ovulation?
It does usually come down a bit, like feel a bit lower, and I have a hard time with the open closeness. Like sometimes I'll go through a cycle where I'll never really feel like it's really very open, but maybe like slightly. Like I have a very hard time feeling the difference. But I sometimes will feel like, okay, it does feel more open and it does feel more closed. And then I will usually notice that it's a good amount higher or a good amount lower, but I didn't seem to notice so much this time.
Well, and does it shift position? Like, do you notice a tilt?
That's such a good question. And I was thinking about this yesterday. I think I may have noticed it before. Again, this month seemed weird where it just seemed like it wasn't moving and I didn't notice a tilt. But I also think I do think I have a hard time. Either it doesn't change a lot in the tilt or I don't notice it, but I'm sure that it does. And something funny that I noticed this month that has been happening on and off is sometimes, usually really late in my premenstrual or the first day of my period, my right thumb pad will be really sore, like in here, which I'm sure some kind of some acupuncturist or something would be like, oh,
yeah.
That's because
that's a pressure point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that has something to do with, I've heard that pad is connected to your low back. So I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's pushing on something. I want to go do my abdominal massage sometime so they can tell me where my uterus is.
Yes. Where is it? Where did it wander to?
Where is it?
Well, so the reason I'm asking all these questions about your cervix is because, I would imagine the subtext of the question around, okay, my temperature, I ovulated, my temperature went pretty high and then it dipped again. And then it started after the dip, then it started to follow a more typical arc. So I would imagine that the subtext of that question is what's going on with my progesterone? Is it high enough? Is that the reason why I'm not seeing just a rise and then it's just staying high? What's the reason for this? So we talked a lot about the cervix in the class. So what I would say is that what I've observed is that your cervix is a good indication of the position of it, is a good indication of what's happening with your progesterone, because your cervix will not change position and firmness until the progesterone rises to a certain level. The changes that occur to the cervix, they only happen because of the hormonal changes that are happening. So one thing that I could just suggest is, well, two things, I guess. One would be so this is just if you're wanting some additional confirmation. And I know you're pretty keen, Rachel. So I know that this might be right up your alley. So this is what I'm suggesting, because I don't want it to be you need to do this, right? But if you're curious about it, even throughout the rest of your cycle, I would say, if you miss a day or whatever. But if you're really wanting to know, then as you're approaching ovulation, try to force yourself to check your cervix every day, just around that period of time. So maybe the week when you start to see mucus, check it every day, and then try to continue checking it until your temperatures have fully rose, so that you can see. And if you do that for a couple cycles, you'll see if there's a connection between when your cervix actually feels different and when your temperatures are actually higher, provided that the temperatures are normal.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And of course that makes sense, but I really hadn't thought of it that way, that it's another indicator of your progesterone or your hormone balance. But of course that's what makes it move. So
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and then the other,
sometimes I get discouraged about checking it because I'm whatever. But now that I know, I'm checking my hormones by checking my cervix, that makes me want to do it more.
Yes. Well, and that brings me to my second point about the cervix, which is that the feeling that you have around it, the kind of it's not doing anything, it's not moving, it's not changing. Most women who check their cervix feel that way. You are not alone. You are among good company. And so we talked a little bit about this in the group session, but my suggestion to you is just to specifically around that time, it's kind of reinforcing what I said about checking it every day around that time. So to kind of take the edge off of yourself, maybe don't worry about it so much at the beginning of your cycle, but when you're at just that 7 to 10 day period, check it. And if you do that for a couple of cycles, what you're looking for, the goal is to find out what your cervix does around ovulation and not worry so much about, is it supposed to be open? Is it supposed to be closed? My cervix isn't as closed as it's supposed to be, because I promise you, you'll never touch anyone else's cervix. Well, most likely, unless you go into medicine or something, you're not going to touch anyone's cervix. So you'll never really know. And so it doesn't really the whole, the concept of what happens. So, softer, higher around ovulation and lower, firmer post ovulation, that's to give you a general kind of guidepost, but really the goal is to find out how your cervix changes around that time.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear. It's good to hear I'm not the only one.
Yeah. Because I mean, at this stage, I don't really know. I would say like one cycle of a weird like temperature dip, it could be so many things. It could be something weird with the temperatures. It could be like you had a random high temperature, a latent effect of the kind of sick stuff you were experiencing before. Like, we just don't know. So what would be more compelling for me to want to look into it more would be if this was an actual pattern that we saw over a couple of charts, which it's not. So this is kind of just a weird one, like you said, because your previous charts, once your temperature went up, it just kind of like hung out there.
Mm-hmm.
So once you get to the stage of charting where like you're really confident, so at the stage where you're at, Rachel, like you're really confident. We're not in the like, let me figure this out for birth control anymore. You've got that figured out. You're really confident. And now we're looking at the chart, obviously more specifically, and like, what can I learn about my health? And I think that's what I talk about on the show all the time. And it's a wonderful tool, and it's an amazing gift, in my opinion, to be able to monitor your health in that way. But at the same time, we don't want to get carried away. So there's no such thing as a perfect chart, and kind of fiddling everything down to try to make it all perfect, and got to get the ovulation on day 14, and like like all of that is like, you are a person, so you're not a robot. And so all of the finagling will never make a perfect chart, because there's no such thing. What we want is to understand what the normal healthy parameters are and try to have our cycles fall as closely within those normal parameters as possible. But we also need to live our lives and not go nuts.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, because it's easy to because it's so exciting and so interesting. So it's really easy to start like nitpicking like every little thing on the chart, and like, why was it 1.1 degree lower on Tuesday, last cycle on this day it was this, like, that is less helpful. It's more of a broad, like, so from my perspective, which is quite different, because I mean, having the long-term charting experience, like almost 2 decades, and also working with so many women, I have a much different perspective of the chart than a lot of people. And what I mean by that is that I look at a chart as a chart, and I don't necessarily give anything on that one chart so much weight. And what I look for are patterns. So it's the biggest treat for me when I get to work with someone like with you, Rachel. I have 3 charts in front of me. So as we're talking, I have June, July, and August. Like, it would be better if we had a whole year, which I think we probably could. But I think you see what I'm saying. So when we're having a conversation, having multiple charts, looking for trends, and getting a sense of the overall pattern of your cycles, that to me is the true value of charting.
Yeah. It really is about the big overarching kind of trends that you see, because like you said, the minutia you can just get into all day long.
Well, and there's the one thing that you can count on with charting is cycle variability and random one-offs. I see it all the time, and it's one of the things that I try to convey in the group, because if you can get your head around the fact that there will always be random one-offs in one area or another, for whatever reason, then that sets you up for successful charting. So if you're using the method for birth control, if you know that you could possibly have a random early ovulation or a random late ovulation, and it not necessarily mean that you're like, you have some serious endocrine disorder. Like, sometimes it's just like you went to the beach and got like a super crazy suntan and like got sick and, ended up kind of feverish and nauseous. And then your ovulation is delayed. Like, it doesn't always mean, like, we don't always have to take it to the level of like, oh my gosh, I've got lupus. And like, that's the end. Like, it's not always that. Sometimes it's just something really simple. It's okay.
And that's why it's so helpful, I would say, to work with a teacher, because they can like take you down from the crazy ladder and like make you feel like it's okay. Like, you're so great because you don't freak out when there's an issue. It's just like, oh, well, like, let's see if it's a pattern. Like, there's no need to start worrying too much about things, because yeah, especially when you're not seeing like long-term patterns of an issue. It's just like, well, I don't know. It was just some little blip.
Yeah. Well, I mean, And this isn't to minimize the fact that there's definitely stuff that does show up in your chart if there is a problem, right? So, but when there's a legit issue going on, and it's not just like a situational thing or some random thing, it does continue to show up. So when you actually have like a legit like health issue that's showing up in your chart, so meaning that this health issue is causing enough change in your body that your cycle is affected, that's going to continue happening in your cycle until the actual health issue is resolved. And so that's another really important, and I would say the central benefit of charting is that your cycle is so intimately connected with your overall health that if you do have a legitimate issue, it will just consistently be a problem in your cycle until that is addressed. So, and that's why my stance of like, I don't freak out, because I mean, if it's a real problem, it'll still be there next month. And then as you address it, you'll see changes. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, in other words, Rachel, is that overall your cycles look relatively healthy. They fall within normal parameters. You've got like a good cycle length. Your luteal phase is of a normal length based on what I'm seeing here. Let me see. I gotta move this thing. So your luteal phase is about 12 days. Ovulation is happening within range. There's a little bit of fluctuation, which is normal. Your periods are about like 3 to 4 days with 1 day of spotting. There's no huge flags. Tell me, how's your mucus production? How was it this cycle?
It was a little low this cycle. And when I had the stretchy, the 10, it was stretchy, but it also seemed to me to be somewhere between, and I don't know if this makes sense, but like stretchy and sometimes like gummy or like rubbery. Like it was like sometimes I couldn't get it to do that, but if I pulled it, like if I held on to it, I could stretch it. And that was a little confusing to me. And that also made me think like cervical inflammation because of the like kind of ropey, thicker texture.
Yeah, that sounds like gummy, like a gummy observation. And in our private session together, and probably also in our group sessions, I think we spoke a little bit about cervical health in your case. And I know you mentioned also that you're doing a few things to address that. So I think in your case, we're still on the journeys.
Yeah. And that's why, and I'm excited. I'm not like, why isn't it better yet? I'm like, it's going to take time. Like I always think like with hormonal health, like give things 3 cycles before you expect any big changes. So try to be patient with it. Yeah. And I haven't, honestly, since I ovulated or since like a couple days after ovulation, I've not been so great about checking before, like wiping before. So I'm like not really sure how the dampness is doing. I keep forgetting and then being like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's part of life. We talked about this a lot in the group. So we don't necessarily go for perfection. If you miss a day, forgive yourself, move on, and, see, there's always more. So if you forget, like, you're going to go pee again today, Rachel. So it's not all lost. So next time you're there. So. Yeah. So I just try to adopt that attitude, because I mean, there's no point in berating yourself. And the other thing is that you've got potentially like, I don't know, like a decade of charting in front of you. Got ample opportunity.
So exciting.
Yeah, if you miss one, it's totally fine. You've got ample opportunity. So as we bring our call to a close, first of all, I should ask you, are there any other burning questions that you wanted to talk about before we go?
I have one thing that if we have time to touch on, I would like to, about breast health and breast issues.
All right.
So we had talked about before that I had been having like fibrocystic breast issues that was like ongoing for about a year or more maybe. And I finally figured out it wasn't low progesterone, and because I wasn't actually having swelling or tenderness, like overall tenderness, I was only having the like lumpy, painful spots. So I finally figured out that's not a progesterone issue. It's probably iodine deficiency. And I had tried iodine before, but I switched to a different type and different dosage, and it worked like a miracle. It was
so. Tell me, like, what was the difference between like before and after?
It was like 1 month I was having 10 days before my period, like lumpy, hard, like a couple, and they would be kind of in different spots every month. It would definitely not always be the same. 1 month it would be like a really hard lump in my right breast, really tender, really sensitive spots. And it had gotten to the point at some months it was like 14 days before my period. And that's when it really started freaking me out, where I'm like, okay, this isn't normal. Like let's figure this out. So I was like down the rabbit hole with like breast health, and I just found so much stuff. Everything most stuff you read is what it's talking about is a progesterone issue. And I was like, that's not what I've got going on. I finally decided, after working on all these things, trying to improve my progesterone levels, and it was making zero impact on the cyst. And so I finally did the iodine and I took it 1 month. I think I took it for like consistently for 2 or 3 weeks, one cycle. And then when I got into my luteal phase the next month, literally zero breast issues, no lumps, no pain. My breasts felt like exactly how they feel the rest of the month. Like it was just like night and day. Like I was like mind blown.
Yeah. Okay. And so did you have a question about that? Because I know you kind of like you tried it and then you kind of backed off and like just kind of figuring all of this out basically.
So I'm still like messing around with it because occasionally I'll still get like a little sore spot. So like I did a little bit of iodine again this month, just only like three days. And so far, like I'm probably going to get my period within the next couple days, according to my chart. And I have no breast tenderness at all, no cysts, nothing. The only thing is that my nipples are really sensitive. And this used to happen to me like a year ago. And I can find zero information about that. But I'm like, it's got to be a hormone, like it's got to be related to something. Like they're very tender and very sensitive. And it's only my nipples, like it's not my breasts at all. And I'm just like, I want to know, like, I don't know if you know or if anyone out there knows, like, what's that? Like, what's that about?
Well, I mean, I know that, like your initial thought of like, is it related to hormones? I mean, due to the fluctuation obviously in your luteal phase, you do have a higher level of progesterone, but you also have a fairly decent, moderate level of estrogen. And so, I mean, it's not uncommon to experience, if you're going to experience breast tenderness, it's typically going to be around ovulation or in your luteal phase. So it can be related to like the estrogen progesterone ratio. So the sensitive nipples, is that like throughout the whole luteal phase, or is that more so towards like right before your period?
It's been like I'm on day 31 now. Actually, it was wrong. It was day 31 today. So I'll probably get my period in 1 to 2 days. And it's been happening for about 6 days.
Okay.
And it did not, and it hasn't happened in like 8 months. Year. Or something. So I'm like, it's just so interesting that I had such a wonky cycle, had funny temperature dips, and I'm having this like symptom that I haven't had in a while. And in my mind, I want to connect it all. Like it's all related.
Yeah, it's hard because I mean, I don't have the specific answer in your case this time. I think that would involve a lot of like blood work. But I mean, there's research to show that for women who experience PMS symptoms, we can just put it under the umbrella, including breast changes and various there's research showing that it is associated with an imbalance of the ratio between estrogen and progesterone. So typically, potentially lower progesterone, higher estrogen than is typical. And so, I mean, it could, if I were to be a guessing woman, I would say that it has something to do with that balance. And I think you also know that I would say that we would want to look for a pattern. So this, knowing that it was a kind of a strange cycle, we're not really sure why the temperatures were a little bit lower right after ovulation and then they raised up afterwards. So, I mean, it's certainly possible that something was just a little bit out of balance this month. And I suppose the real test is whatever happens in the next cycle. So if the next cycle is more typical and you don't experience anything that delays your ovulation, if you don't experience any kind of abnormal temperature patterns and everything looks fine and you don't experience it, then that is what's really going to give us the the answer just on that kind of body literacy level of what could be there. It's hard because we don't always have this like the specific answers, like I said, because it would involve blood work.
Yeah.
Months of it to determine the levels.
Could just have personalized blood work every day.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you kind of can with the Dutch test now,
but that also tells you what's going on one day.
Yeah.
So I mean, to get the like.
Well, I think they do one now though that's like, it's really expensive, but you can actually do it where they chart.
Yeah, every day but I mean, there's still, you're not getting so okay, to get the ad nauseum, like I want it all. I would imagine like you'd have to be on like a drip and have the levels of your actual blood tested all day long, all month long. Arguably, so when I did my training to become a holistic reproductive health practitioner to teach fertility awareness. So from the perspective of when you understand how the changes in your cycle, how, they're happening because of these fluctuations in your hormones. And when you're charting your cycles, you can also pay attention to other symptoms that are outside of that. So for many women, breast tenderness, kind of slight bloating, or just certain specific symptoms that occur after ovulation. For many women, that can be how they confirm that they've ovulated, because they only get those symptoms post-ovulation. So there's kind of an other school of thought that we could argue that you don't necessarily need to have a drip blood work every day, because if you really get a sense of your cycles, you can have that knowledge in your home. So it's not the same as having labs, but considering it's pretty amazing information that you can have without testing, right? So I'm not sure if this is helpful, but I would be interested to see what happens next cycle. And also, if you can remember when you were experiencing it, or if you wrote it down, and if you were to take a look at your cycle from a year ago and see if you could see any similarities, that would also be really interesting.
Yeah, I was going to do some research on it and get back into when that was happening, like a year ago, what was going on. I'm guessing it's an estrogen thing, but that's just my feeling.
I've read that specifically the sore, like the nipples, like the tenderness in the nipples can be related to high estrogen around ovulation. So it's entirely possible. A lot of like I said, when it comes to PMS symptoms, a lot of the symptoms are related to this, like especially during the 5 to 7 days prior to your period. It's kind of related. There's some research that shows that a percentage of women who experience those types of issues, they have kind of a sharper dip in their progesterone. And then their estrogen is still relatively high to moderate. So that's a thing. Well, we won't have an exact answer today, though. But at least we can have an idea of what could be related. Yeah. All right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here. Of course, always a pleasure, and always keeping me on my toes with your awesome questions. What for the woman who's listening, maybe in a similar situation as you are, looking for birth control, or maybe is just admiring the fact that you're so comfortable with your cycles and you've learned so much from them, and you are quite confident in your ability to chart. I think there's a lot of women who are listening that really want to get there. What would you want to tell her, kind of to support her on her journey?
Oh, wow. Well, that it's 100% worth it, but it is going to be some effort, and that it doesn't happen quickly. Like, you don't get to that point where like, and everything makes sense and I understand it all. Like, even if you are like super tight, which I wasn't that intense when I started charting, but I think even if you are and you're charting perfectly from the beginning, it just takes a while for this stuff to really sink in. And over time, it's like these different layers of it kind of wash over you. And I can't imagine, like, Lisa, how much different of an understanding you have now, just having so many years of charting. But I just think it's invaluable. Like, it's like some people keep a journal or a diary and then they look back like, oh, it's so helpful to see, like, well, this is that, like, times 10. Like, this is your diary, your journal, your doctor's report. Like, I make notes about every aspect of my life in my chart, like my feelings, what I'm doing. It's kind of my whole picture. It's just like a snapshot of my whole life kind of in there. And now I don't have to write it in a diary. So.
Well, you mentioned something at the beginning of the call about how you love the first day of your period. And you also mentioned kind of you're super interested in how your brain works around that time and how it's different. And since I'm circling back to that, I just wanted to know if you wanted to comment on that a little bit, because I find it to be fascinating when you're aware of how your emotions can shift throughout your cycle, like when you actually pay attention, especially because if you're cycling, you're just going to keep cycling. So like you get to experience these things over and over again.
I plan my whole life around each different phase of my cycle, like what movies I'm going to watch, where I'm going to go, everything. Like I'll I was joking with a friend. I was like, I was like finding this really like a sad movie from like 1975 with like whatever. And I was like, but I can't watch that now. I have to put that on like my premenstrual watch list. Like it's not going to make any sense to me right now. I literally have zero interest in this movie right now, but I know that I will be super into it and it will be like just what I need in the premenstrual. And oh God, I go on and on about this, but it just makes everything so much easier when you realize that the ways that you're acting aren't crazy and that it actually makes total sense. And like you said, it's a cycle and you're going to do like it's exactly the same every month, but it's going to have a lot of similar themes that you start to pick up on of like how you work. And if you can work with that instead of fighting it, it's going to be a lot easier and you're going to be more productive when you need to be productive, and realize that like there's some days you're going to be productive, but it's in very different ways. Like I'll end up reorganizing my entire something inevitably every luteal phase. Like my boyfriend will know, like he'll come in the living room and I've like moved to the couch, taken all the books off the like these shelves behind me. I painted these in my last luteal phase because I was like, these are black. I hate this. Like this has to be painted right now. And I like went out to the store, bought the paint, like did it. I love the end of the luteal phase because it's like can I curse? It's like get stuff done. You know what I mean? Like you just finish it up and like I'll know that I don't have to worry about. I'll be like, nah, I'll get that done this luteal phase. Like I put things off intentionally because I know that I will actually enjoy it. Then I'll be better at it, faster at it. Yeah, and when you can plan in that way, I just find it so helpful. And again, those are things that do take a lot of time to really hone in and see. And I'm still like, I still learn things about it every month. I'll be like, oh, there was a new little detail I picked up on, and it just gets better and better. Like I can't, it's so juicy for me. I love everything about it.
No, I love that. And I love the example. And I think because everyone's different. So for some women, maybe in that phase, they just don't want to do a whole lot of anything. But what's really, I suppose, the central theme there is what you kind of learn how, like you said, exactly your words, how you work. And it's really empowering. And it's something that you kind of have to learn on your own because it's not culturally taught. So there's a lot of talk about biohacking and figuring all this stuff out, but it's often very masculine and it's not from a woman's perspective. So this is our own version of that.
I used to work in the biohacking world a bit. And let me tell you, it messed my hormones up real bad because it's such a masculine approach. And I'm just like, don't do it. Don't do it that way. Like do it in a feminine way. Like you have to remember that you're cyclical. And if not, it's like, why are you wasting all that time fighting it?
Mm-hmm. Well, and so for anyone who is thinking about jumping in and joining a class, I know that it can be intimidating, especially if someone's listening and they have never charted. I often get emails from women who say like, is it okay if I don't even have one chart? And I always say like, yes, because it's just, I mean, we all start from the same spot, even if you've been charting. But I just love to hear your thoughts on that before we wrap up today.
Yeah, like what I would say to someone who's just starting, like, oh, gosh, take advantage of a class now because I didn't know any of these things. I don't know if they were, I mean, you were probably teaching back then, but I didn't know you were out there. Like, I didn't, it took me a long time to find these people doing this work on my own. and take advantage of it because you'll save yourself a lot of time and hassle. And it's so much fun to do it in a group. And some of the women in our group were very new to charting or like just figuring it out. And, that's like perfectly fine. Like they were doing it. And I can't imagine like a better way to get started on charting.
All right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being here. Always a pleasure chatting with you. It's pretty clear that you and I could just chat about vagina, cervix related topics or anything else. But I mean, come on. We could talk about it all day long. But thank you so much for being here. It's so much fun having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really glad we got to chat.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/224. I hope that you enjoyed my interview with Rachel. It was such a treat to have her on the show. And of course, Rachel, I just want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your experience with everybody. I know that for most of my clients, these are their most favorite episodes, the client sessions, because they really do give a lot of insight about charting. And it's really incredible because, we're talking about the same topic, but in each client session, different little nuggets come out, different questions are asked, and of course each woman has slightly different experience with charting. So these episodes are some of my favorite to do as well, of course, because it gives me an extra opportunity to spend a little bit of time with my clients. And in Rachel's case, our program had just ended, so this was an opportunity for us to actually connect once more before we actually kind of concluded everything. So yes, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And again, last call, if you are wanting to jump in and join us, and especially if whether you've been charting your cycles for quite some time and you know that you don't yet feel fully confident and you have a lot of specific questions about your charts, the 10-week program is a really great option because it gives you the opportunity to basically, it's like your brain on my brain, and you get to pick my brain and ask me all of the questions that come to mind. And I love that. I always get a few women who really will give me tons of questions, will prepare their questions ahead of time, and really come to our private sessions and our group sessions with like lists of questions about their charts. And what's really great about having 10 weeks is that you have enough time to go through all of those. So there's no rush. There's no you don't have to worry that you're not going to get your questions answered. You have lots of time to ask them, to ask follow-up questions, clarifying questions, and then kind of go away and chart a little bit. And then the questions that come up afterwards, you have an opportunity to ask those as well. So, I really designed the program to give you an opportunity to have full access and to really, the whole point is to get you to the point where you're confident, because with charting, it's a life skill. And once you get it, you have it forever. I thought about different iterations, kind of different lengths of time. But what I found just after working with, well over 100 women, over the past several years, this kind of structure, having 10 sessions over nearly 3 months and having private sessions as well, that really gives you ample time and time to learn, time to ask questions, but also time to practice. So wherever you are in your fertility awareness journey, so if you've never charted a cycle before, don't be put off by this interview with Rachel, given that she had so much experience. Whether, I've had women on all ends of the spectrum, some women who are literally going out and buying a thermometer before the first session because they've never charted a day in their lives. And then I've had women on the other end who've tried it for several years or more. So wherever you are, everybody, even for the women who were charting before, we're always learning a new method because the women in my group haven't learned this method before. And so we're all kind of starting together and learning from scratch. So you don't have to have any charting experience to join. But if you do have charting experience, it's always fun to have that perspective in the group. So for more information, head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. And, you can also email me. I have a contact form on the Fertility Friday website, so you can email me if you have questions about the group. We would love to have you in there. But of course, you only have a couple of days to make your decision. So with that said, I just want to thank you for tuning into the show. I really appreciate all of you for spreading the word and sharing the show with your friends. I know I say this all the time, so for those of you who listen to every episode, it's like, here she goes again. But I really do appreciate it. I hear so much feedback from the listeners, I have a lot of new women jumping into the Facebook group, every week. And one of the questions I ask is, how did you hear about the group? And I hear a lot of women saying that their friends shared the episode, or their practitioners, or their sisters, their cousins, whoever it is. So it's really nice to know that all of you are kind of out there spreading the word, because of course the other thing that I hear a lot is, how actually just today I did an introductory post in the Facebook group, and one of the women who jumped in and introduced herself, I believe that what she said, because I don't have it up, but I believe what she said was, how am I 34 years old and this is the first time I'm hearing about all of this? So it's really important. It's crazy, because once you learn it, you can't even imagine not knowing it, because it's just such an integral part of your life as a woman. But it's incredible, because unless we're taught, we just have no idea, how our bodies work, how our cycles work, how our fertility works, how it changes with time. So I really do appreciate all of you for being part of this community, and for spreading the word, and for talking about it and sharing the podcast, and really just sharing body literacy with women, because I really believe that within our generation, we're going to see some changes. The more women that know about this, the more the world is going to change. So with that said, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful week or weekend whenever you're listening to this. If you're listening in the future, have a wonderful whatever day it is when you're listening to this. And of course, as always, be well and happy charting.